I would like to show you how to use a rotary cutter to cut fabric for your sewing projects. This is a rotary cutter. This is a straight edge or an acrylic ruler, and this is a cutting mat. Now this particular cutting mat is self-healing, which means when you run your blade across it, it does not cut all the way through. And it also has grid lines, vertically and horizontally. And those grid lines will help you cut straighter lines. Now you can use a straight edge and scissors for many of your sewing projects. However, the rotary cutter will help you make more precise measurements and straighter edges. We're going to practice using the rotary cutter to cut 3.5-inch blocks on this scrap piece of fabric. Now before you cut your fabric for your sewing projects, it's important to wash and iron the fabric before you cut. And you do this so that the fabric shrinks appropriately before you sew the project together. If you don't wash your fabric beforehand, this can cause problems later on after you've sewn your project together and wash it. So just be sure to wash and iron your fabric before you cut. Now take your scrap piece of fabric and you'll want to align at least one of the edges here. And I fold it in half. You don't necessarily have to fold your fabric in half, but you do want to make sure the entire piece of fabric fits on the mat. So if you have a large piece of fabric, you might need to fold it 1 or 2 times to ensure that the entire fabric fits on the mat. If it didn't fit all on the mat, then you can't see your grid lines to make straight cuts. Now if you are using a fabric that has a linear pattern like this, you would want to make sure that your linear pattern is aligned before you cut it. Because if you didn't, then you might have crooked lines in your blocks, and you wouldn't want that. So take extra caution when you're cutting fabric with linear patterns to it. So you take your fabric, and again, I'm folding it in half, and you line it up along one of the horizontal lines, grid lines here. So after you've lined it up, take your straight edge or your ruler and align that ruler along one of the vertical grid lines. Now the first thing we're going to do is just clean up an edge. So you don't want a lot of overhang because you don't want to waste your fabric, but you want to make sure that the one edge of your fabric is straight. So if you're right-handed, take the rotary cutter in your right hand and apply pressure on the ruler with your left hand. And you want to apply firm pressure to this, but be very careful because these blades are extremely sharp, and if you slip you could really hurt yourself, so be careful. And when you're not using the blade, make sure the safety guard is on. So applying firm pressure with your left hand, take your rotary cutter and you want to butt that up against the ruler. And again, applying firm pressure starting from the bottom and rolling it up. Now before you move that ruler, you want to make sure you've made a cut all the way through, and I haven't. So now you can just go right over that same line. And you've made your first cut. Now we're making 3.5-inch blocks, so without moving the fabric, and again, it's important not to move your fabric, or move your fabric as little as possible, because this will really ensure more precise measurements. Because each time you pick your fabric up, you'll have to realign it against one of the grid lines. So sliding the ruler over to the 3.5-inch mark, and you take the ruler again, applying firm pressure with your left hand and rolling with your right hand. And there you have a 3.5-inch strip. If you wanted to make multiple strips, you could continue on and make an additional cut. But for now, we're going to move on to making the block. Now, depending on the length of your fabric, you may want to turn your mat the other direction so that the entire piece of fabric fits on there. Again, just so you don't have to move your fabric after you've begun cutting. So now take your strip and align it again along one of the horizontal grid lines. Take your ruler and we're going to clean up the edge. Slide your ruler again over 3.5 inches and make another line. And there you have a 3.5 inch square.